Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome back to a new school year and a new school year at Data Science for Everyone. We're so excited to have you all here. We'll wait a couple seconds for folks to hop on into Zoom and transition from whatever other calls they may be coming from. If you all want to add your name and introduce yourself in the chat, share your name, organization, and why you're interested in joining the event today. We'd love to hear from you and get a sense of who's joining us in the Zoom chat. Yeah, we're so excited and thrilled to have you all here for today's discussion. On behalf of the Data Science for Everyone Coalition, welcome to Data Literacy for Young Learners. My name is Eric Drosa. I'm the Executive Director for Data Science for Everyone. To give you a little background on our group, Data Science for Everyone is a national initiative, coalition, and community based at the University of Chicago. And we are striving to catalyze the adoption of data science and data literacy as a basic component of K-12 education. Our work and our little effort here was originally catalyzed from a Freakonomics podcast back in 2019. And the push for data literacy has since become a national movement with thousands of education leaders and practitioners, and now 27 participating states across the country who have launched programs or enabled local school and district programs within their states. And we currently work on 4 major things, which are displayed on the slide here: raising awareness, gathering and catalyzing classroom resources, community building, and policy as it relates to data science education. Before we get started today, I would like to remind everyone about the DS4E community standards. We welcome coalition members of all different backgrounds and levels of experience with data science education. To create room for a healthy and engaging debate, we've established a code of conduct that creates an environment of respect, inclusion, and effective communication. You can learn more about our community standards, including how to report violations, on our website, and we'll drop a link in the chat now in case you need it. Before we dive into today's discussion, we'd love to invite you to join us if you happen to be attending NCTM Annual, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Annual Conference in Chicago next month. We would love to connect with you in person. We're hosting, we're so excited to host you all in my hometown of Chicago. So we'd love to see you there. We'll both be facilitating an in-person community meetup, and we'll also have a spot in the exhibit hall to talk all things data science. So I hope to see you around in Chicago if you plan on joining. Well, with those a couple quick intro things out of the way, I am thrilled to introduce this lineup of education experts who have proven successful at building very engaging and innovative data science education programs and content for K-5 students. I'm going to pass the mic over to our moderator, Lee Ellen Harmer, very soon. She is the partnerships manager here at Data Science for Everyone and has been working with our curriculum design director, Mahmoud Harding, to lead a K-5 data science working group over the past several months. Our hope is that this discussion will bring you all tangible takeaways you can bring to your own learning communities, and will help share some of that early work and part of a broader effort that we're going to continue to build over the next year or so to support K-5 educators. Our speakers today bring a wealth of knowledge to the space, and I am so pleased to introduce Ashley Hinton, who currently teaches at Durham Academy and is a 17-year elementary school educator. She has taught 1st through 5th grades in North Carolina, Washington, D.C., and New Jersey. Speaking of the Great Garden State, we're also joined by Deidre Richardson, who currently serves as the K-12 mathematics coordinator for academic standards with the New Jersey Department of Education. She has more than 20 years of experience in public education. And finally, we have Michelle Hinton, who has spent the last 14 years as an administrator, serving as a K-8 principal and assistant principal, the director of secondary schools and professional development for the Archdiocese, and is currently assistant principal at Mother Teresa Catholic Elementary School. And to my knowledge, Ashley and Michelle are not related, but we'll find that out as we go through the webinar here. With that, I'll hand it over to Lee Ellen to begin our discussion today. I'm so excited for this presentation.
Great. Thank you, Zarek. As Zarek mentioned, over the last 8 or 9 months, we have been meeting with a K-5 working group. It's a small cohort of individuals from various groups representing state agencies, technology coordinators, and teachers. And we've been discussing what data literacy and introductory data science can and does look like in grades K through 5. So some folks in the working group are knee-deep in implementations, and others are really just beginning their journeys. And so the discussion has really revolved around the language we should use with these students, how concepts should be introduced, and how to go deeper with data in elementary school classrooms. And most importantly, what approaches and resources teachers can employ to address data literacy concepts, which is why we think a lot of you are probably here today. So something that we keep coming back to over and over again within the working group is the great opportunity for cross-disciplinary teaching with data literacy. Some teachers are already addressing data in their classrooms, but we need to go deeper. And we need to use data as the connecting thread to weave stories together across subjects. And in many cases, it's not enough to simply identify data or count objects to create a data set. Instead, we must give students context and help them identify and understand the stories the data is telling us. So that's where we find that data becomes really powerful, and it's through those stories and that context. So now I know you're wondering, how do we go about this? At the end of the webinar, we will link to our new K-5 data literacy implementation guide that the working group produced to help lead this work in elementary classrooms. We will also be hearing, of course, today from our panel of experts who will tell us how they got started with this work. And it's important to note that this work is being done around the country in public, private, and parochial school arenas. And today's session spotlights just a few folks who are right in the middle of it. So on that note, let's bring in our experts, Ashley, Deidre, and Michelle, and let's hear from them directly. Great. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so excited to hear from you. Ashley, I'd love to start with you. The first question is, some people may assume that you can't implement data science learning until later in a student's career. Can you share how you incorporate this work in your classroom?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question, Lee Ellen, and good afternoon, everyone. Excited that you're here. So when a lot of people think about data science, they think of using big data sets, sophisticated technology, programming, looking for trends and data to create models and help businesses make decisions. And that is what data science is in the adult world. But we do have to start somewhere, and that starts with our curious younger learners, just like my second graders. So just like in elementary school where young students would be learning to spell words or write simple sentences or read really easy books, that's so that later they can write essays and write reports and read novels. Our younger students at this level are learning their basic data literacy skills, so that eventually they can prepare for those classes and more advanced data literacy skills in high school and college and beyond. So today I want to share with you some examples of how data literacy starts in the second grade classroom and what that can look like, how it transcends basic math and statistics curriculums that we're using, and how we can implement it in our social studies, science, reading, and even SEL components that we're doing every day in the classroom in elementary school. It really can be very interdisciplinary. So here you're going to see an activity, a picture from my classroom, because students are always collecting data, sorting data, visualizing data, looking for trends, patterns, and they're always asking questions inspired by their observations. It's week 2 of second grade right now, and I can't tell you how many questions I've answered this week. But this image is an image of an activity that you could see in any elementary school classroom starting the year off. We all ask our students, how are you feeling coming in? It's probably an activity I did myself also as a second grader. But it's how we approach these activities that can help our students develop their data literacy vocabulary and skills. So I love to give the students ownership over collecting the data, sorting the data, visualizing the data, and asking the questions themselves. So to answer the question, how do we feel on the first day of school? We are going to need data. If you look closely at this image, you can see that one way to take the activity up a notch was to have the students draw their feelings. So this is helping them become more data literate, because once they drew their feelings, then they came together to work together and figure out how they could sort the data themselves. They talked about what groups they could sort them into. They talked about how they could classify those groups. They talked about what we could label, where we could put it, and they worked together to help visualize the data for people coming into our classroom. This year in particular, I put it up for back to school night for our parents to see. And then we were also able to talk as a class about what the other 3 second grade classrooms data might look like. What would we expect their data to look like? What would we expect it not to look like? And it allowed for them to have that rich discussion and get to know their peers. Another activity like this that you might see in many classrooms, you might have done it yourself as a small child, was tracking the growth of plants. So that's another activity we do in the spring where teams break into, groups break into teams and they're growing plants. And then they are doing this over a pretty long period of time. But as they're tracking their data, they're starting to see maybe this group's plant is growing faster. Maybe this group's plant is not growing at all. They start asking more questions, leaning into their science understanding of how plants grow. And they really get into it, starting to ask more questions, research, what could we be doing differently? Is this group getting more sun? Is this classroom better situated? Do we need to put saran wrap on? So their data is really helping them understand something. And then they're starting to communicate to others with what they're seeing in the classroom by using the data that they're collecting. So both of these activities can be interdisciplinary. The first activity was my students getting to know each other and their classmates through data, whereas the second activity would be my students engaging in a science topic and investigating how to best grow a plant. So let's look at another activity that I just completed this week with my second graders, provided by our math curriculum Bridges. I love this activity every single year. So students create images that you can see on our rug. These are their beetles, and each image is created based on characteristics that are unique to my second graders. So each component represents an answer to a question. So for example, if you look at the beetle's color is going to represent the answer to the question, what's your favorite type of book to read? Blue would represent nonfiction books, while a green would represent mysteries. Or the beetle's hat color would represent the student's favorite sport. So a red hat might represent swimming, whereas a blue hat would represent basketball. So here you see my students, they're taking the survey data and they're trying to figure out, okay, now that we have this data, what's a question we could answer with the data that we have? And then how would we best do that? So it's really exciting to see as they start to ask questions that we could answer with our data, they really do start to see that by sorting and visualizing the data, they're better able to answer their questions. So it's exciting every year to see them sort the data, figure out all the different stories they can tell. They're learning also how to label it each time because there's a lot of components on each of the beetles. And every time they resort it, they have to relabel it, retell the story, and they sort it and they sort it and they sort it again. And we're able to see a lot about our class that we wouldn't have otherwise from this data set. Another example that we can talk about is, in classrooms, we're always trying to engage students with their learning. And one way to engage students with their learning is by developing curiosity and engaging them with authentic problems. So I want to talk about how we also can engage our families with authentic problems that really excite students, but also inspire the families to dive into some explorations as well. So here what you're looking at is our home learning boards. This is how our team does home learning for our families. We call these our home learning boards. They go home on Monday every week, and they provide new activities each week for our families that are connected to what we're learning in the classroom. So the first activity here is candy math. And so I'll kind of explain what that is since I know you can't read it very well right now. But candy math is an activity that you could do to go along with Halloween. So many families are already out, they're collecting candy. A lot of our students at this time are super excited because there's more candy in their house than usual. And for this activity, we wanted students to ask questions with what they were collecting in their Halloween trick-or-treating. So here are some of the questions that we wanted our students to ask and choose between before they even looked at their candy stash when they were doing this assignment. So the first question they could answer is, which type of candy do you think you got the most of? Chocolate, suckers, gummy candies, or hard candies? Why do you think that? The second question could have been, which category do you think you have more candies in? A candy made up of one piece, a candy made up of two pieces, or a candy pack made up of multiple pieces? Why do you think that? And then finally, what's the most frequent dominant packaging color of your candy stash? Why do you predict that? So from here, once they create their question, they can sit down with their candy and they're encouraged to sort their data and see what conclusions you can draw and if their predictions were correct. Another example that comes to mind when I think of our home learning experiences is during the week of Earth Day, we have our students track how many pieces or how many items are you throwing away versus how many items are you recycling. This is helping students see their impact. They come back, we have rich sustainability questions. We can talk about the awareness and our impact on the environment in a way that we can improve our practices. So activities like this are great for getting kids curious, having them explore, and helping them to build a language and set of tools around data. And then finally, the last example I can share with you today is a cool way that our second graders are learning about their local community as a part of our social studies curriculum and how we make use of data to explore our community and make connections and comparisons with other communities. And we can go to the next slide to see us. And you will see us here on our downtown Durham field trip, where we do an intensive 2-day walking tour of our city. So as we walk, we're learning about the rich history of Durham, and we're also learning about important community members. So this project over the years has really grown and brought in more and more players to teach our students about our community. But this summer, I was inspired by an opportunity I had with the National Endowment for the Humanities, where I got to go learn about Kansas City and their community. And so I wanted to incorporate a data component to compare Durham to another city for my students, which I chose Kansas City, so that they can see a city that, yes, has some things very similar to Durham, but also what differences do we have. So this year, my plan is to have my second graders work in teams to develop 2 questions to try and answer about our community. And of course, to answer the questions, they're going to need to collect data when we go downtown. So here are some examples of the questions I'm anticipating that my second graders could come up with. What type of restaurants are in our downtown area? What type of jobs do we see people doing in our community? Or even looking at the architecture, what are our buildings made from downtown? So from there, the students will come back to the classroom, we'll analyze their data, and we're going to think about how to share the story of our community through the data that they learned about and collected with another set of students in Kansas City. This will tie into our letter writing project that we do year round, writing letters to different people to communicate, but this time they're going to be learning about another community from the data they collected. So hopefully, excuse me, hopefully you can see from these examples that yes, data science is a large part of the elementary school curriculum. The main themes for us are building data curiosity, allowing students to explore and play with data, and building students' foundational literacy skills. So thanks for the question, Lee Ellen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was really exciting. And I'd love to be part of the class trip that goes downtown.
Every year. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. So Deidre, next I'd like to go to you and hear a little bit more about your experiences in New Jersey. What was your approach to incorporating data science into the standards for K-5? And did you target specific areas or did you find ways to integrate it across various topics, units, or disciplines?
Yes, thank you, Leanne. It's a great question. So for us, we felt as if we wanted to start with mathematics in terms of the policy approach to integrating data literacy. And for us, that looked like engaging the educators that opted into participating in the standards development process to ask them what their perspectives were on this, to ask them to identify and leverage the research and literacy around data literacy in elementary spaces, to help them to understand and conceptualize like what was possible. But we also thought about like other policy that was in place. So for example, in the K-5 math standards, there's a progression of students' understanding of number and quantity. So we start with whole number and then we move into fraction and then we move into decimal in upper elementary. And so they brought all of those things to bear. And thinking about what the standards were that we could integrate that will really better engage students in data. And I say better engage because we came to this process with some data standards, but those data standards were really focused on quantity, right? They would always lead students to ask or answer questions like how many more, how many less. And yes, they did some work with developing visualizations, but it was all in service of quantity and understanding and developing numeracy. And so what we wanted to do was broaden that so that in the elementary spaces and engaging with data literacy, they could really think more about rich context and ask and answer more questions about the context and use mathematics in that way. So for us, it was about really bringing our stakeholders together to gather their perspectives, because we all know, like with the adoption of policy, we need our stakeholder buy-in. I think the other thing I would share that our teachers thought about in integrating data literacy in elementary was our state-specific context. So we are a state for which kindergarten is not compulsory. And so that will often make first grade a bit of a heavier burden when you have students coming into first grade without any structured or formal schooling experience. So that led us to start with second grade. So you'll see our new elementary data literacy standards begin in grade 2 and then build and extend up into grade 5. So that was our specific approach to integrating data literacy. I think the other thing I would say to answer your question, Lee Ellen, is that so for us, we find that we can take standards from one discipline and integrate that into an interdisciplinary unit in another. So for me, since my role is as the K-12 mathematics coordinator, my approach is that in the social studies unit, for example, in K-5, of these new data literacy standards can be brought in to those units, and you end up with an interdisciplinary data lesson in that regard without having another layer of data standards in the social studies standards. So that is just the approach that we have undertaking at this point. Other states have their own unique landscapes and may have a different approach, but that was the approach that we decided we could tackle and conquer at this stage of the data literacy process for New Jersey. And if we want, we can move into my first slide, which gives us a couple of examples of the standards that we developed. Number one of the things that we did statewide is to put out what we meant when we said data literacy. So because information literacy is also part of the national conversation, we wanted to be really clear about what we were meaning when we were saying data literacy. And so this is what we provided to our educators at that time. And then this is a couple of the standards that they wrote. One of the things that was important for us is that we started with some mathematical ideas. And so the second grade standard here about understanding that people collect data to answer questions and understanding that data can vary, it was intended to lay the foundation for just kind of foundational ideas around data without moving students into like a particular performance around data. So teachers can tackle those standards in any way that they see fit. But we wanted students to enter this new data conversation, if you will, with some foundational ideas about data. And then for the third grade standard that you see here on the screen, data-based questions is new language for us. We wanted to develop standards for which the language was accessible to all of the elementary educators across the state. So we shied away a little bit from using words like statistical questions because we thought that might be a little daunting and less inviting. And so we went with data-based questions. And so students start thinking about what types of questions are data-based questions and whether or not that question whether or not what data they need to collect in order to answer that particular question. So similar to what Ashley is doing with her second graders in their travels. And so we can go on to the next slide. Here are a couple of our examples from fourth and fifth grade, where students are thinking about strategies for collecting various types of data, how they might think about organizing data digitally. We introduced them to the notion of cleaning data in fifth grade and give folks some examples of what we mean by that. So making sure an entry is formatted consistently, thinking about how do I deal with missing data or data that is incomplete. So just some early attempts at getting kids thinking about what it means to clean data and why that's important. And then the use of appropriate visualizations. The other thing that we made really clear to New Jerseyans in thinking about the new data literacy standards is that when they are engaging in analysis of data or analysis of visualizations at these grades, that students have not worked with ratio or rate or proportion or percentages. So we have to really be cognizant and strategic in the types of questions that we ask students when we are facilitating their interpreting visualizations or the analysis of data, because they do not yet have the understanding of proportions or percentages. And so that's something that we in New Jersey are working through and really pushing out guidance around what are the ways in which we can ask students to interpret visualizations that don't push them over into grade 6 content, which is the ratio and proportion. And so I'm going to stop here and give folks a chance to enter questions in the chat, but I will turn it back over to Lee Allen.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I love these examples and giving us some kind of tangible pieces of what that can look like in each grade. So thank you very much. All right, Michelle, we are moving on to you now. I would love to hear from you and understand why did your school make the decision to integrate data into the curriculum, and what results have you seen?
Sure. So our school goes through an accreditation process, a review of how we're doing and what we can improve on. It's a 6-year cycle. So, and during that time, then we do a deep dive into all the data that we have available to us as adults in the building. And so we had reviewed all of our standardized test data, all the anecdotal data from our team members. And it became really clear that the one thing we felt like we were really missing out on, while there's always multiple things you can work on, right, was our students really having a firm understanding of how to collect data, how to use data, how to interpret data, how to display data, all those different things. And that was an area where we saw them not only struggling in the classroom with, but also that our data, our personal data did support along the way. And so we decided to make that our goal as for improvement over the next few years and build students' data literacy skills. And that was not the words we had when we first started, but it definitely came to become that as we went through the process of refining what we really were talking about, what we really meant. I'm actually in a K-8 school. And so for our students in 7 and 8, who are, the beneficiaries of all the years before that, they engage in science fair. And so there's a lot of data usage in science fair, but our kids got to 7th grade most of the time without really having a firm understanding of that. And so our process then became looking back to how do we start that from the very beginning of understanding how to interpret data you might have, how to display data that you collect, what kinds of representations do we use all along the way. And so over this, we're in the beginning of our 2nd year of implementation of this goal and professional learning with our team. And year 1 produced more than I ever anticipated in 1 year of work from the team with not a ton of heavy lifting, I'm going to say. It wasn't like adding a whole bunch to someone's plate. But having teachers have a clearer understanding of what is grade level appropriate from K through 5. what we can do, what we already naturally have built into the curriculum where we can make the connections like Ashley was talking about. And then how we can make that span. Now this year, we're going to dive a little bit more into moving across other curricular areas. We started with a heavy math science focus because it's a really natural place, but also those units, my teachers were, very quick to say are the ones we often speed through or we leave till last. And do we get to it? Maybe, maybe not. And so they figured out ways to move it into the curriculum throughout the entire year so that it became very natural. We also did some whole school displays of data in our hallways where every student in the school participated. So we have this year 650 plus students. And so, every student, when we do those, will participate on one of the data displays and add their mark, so to speak, to the data. And then each grade level will use that data in a different way. So it's much different on how the kindergarten is going to use that to mostly display data or talk about what has the most, what has the least. Whereas our 7th and 8th graders are going to write questions. They're going to the teachers often cover up the question that the data is about. And then they're going to do something more that even in our 4th, 5th, 6th grade about what those what kind of questions I could ask about this data. What can I want to know more about or refine or regroup? So it's been amazing, just the progress in 1 year and how natural it has become into adding it into your everyday, what you do. And so it doesn't feel like an add-on. It doesn't feel like an extra load for a teacher who already maybe feels like, I have so many standards. How am I ever going to get to this? But it becomes just a part of the classroom each day.
That's wonderful. I would assume that was probably very reassuring to a lot of folks on the call as well, to hear that this is something that can be incorporated and that it's not a huge lift. So thank you. That is great.
You're welcome.
All right, wonderful. So at this point, we are actually going to take a moment to ask our panelists some of the questions that our audience members submitted both at registration and during the presentation in the chat here. So let's turn over to our first question. So adding something new can be overwhelming for some. Michelle, you kind of just touched on that just a bit. What approaches did your educators take when integrating data, and are there specific resources that made the process easier? Michelle, do you want to start with that actually?
Sure. We actually partnered with someone specifically with DataSpire to come in and help us kind of, scope out the development for my team to figure out what was best and where to start. There was a lot of choices. I kind of narrowed those down and work on designing that along the way, but that was a great resource for us for where to begin and how to even get started. Because honestly, when I first began looking at this and saying, this is going to be our goal, and I have to figure out what professional development or supports to provide to my teachers to get there, I wasn't sure where to start. So that was kind of our starting point.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Let's see. So Ashley, I think this next question might be good for you. You've talked a little bit about this in your classroom, but can you share some more specific examples of whole school data collection that resonated with your students? And specifically, they kind of asked for pictures or question examples, but if you can just give us some more insight on that.
Sure. So separate from the examples that I've already shown?
Yes. Yes, I think they're looking for additional and more of the, did you do any of sort of the whole school type collection as opposed to maybe just your classroom?
No, so I do think that what Michelle was sharing about how they do whole school, like that totally piqued my head. And I was like, that would be an amazing thing to have students looking at one data set, but asking so many different questions based on where the students are. For the most part, with my classroom, it's been within my classroom, and then a lot of conversations after we've done our own exploration with the data has been around what would we expect to see in other classrooms? Would we expect their data to be similar? How might it change? that kind of thing. Anything that we've done outside of our classroom might have also been around with like our upper school buddies. So sometimes we meet with our 11th grade, they're now 11th graders. The buddies come down and do some activities with the students. So it could have been when we were doing who can make the airplane that flies the fastest. So they're collecting their data there. And then they have the 11th graders to help them figure out with those different STEM experiments that they do, kind of what's going on. And that allows them to have a little bit more leverage with the language they're using. But for the most part, it's within our classroom or grade level. But Michelle definitely made me start thinking about school-wide as well.
Yep, perfect. And I'm going to actually bounce that back to Michelle as well and see if you can give us some more specifics by any chance.
Sure. So the data, some of the data examples were we did things like birthday month. What month were you born in? You know, and it was just a big graph where everybody added to it.
Uh-oh, we may have lost her. Let's give her just a minute and see if maybe there was a little glitch with the network. All right, we are going to give Michelle a moment and see if she comes back online. And then in the meantime, Deidre, I don't know if you have seen anything like this happening in some of those local schools, if that's something you can speak to, or if we want to jump into a new question for you.
I have not seen that yet. We are in the very early stages of implementing our new standards.
Okay.
And we actually will not require implementation until September of 2025. So we are still in the process of developing resources to support our educators and developing curricula and preparing for implementation.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. That's great. All right, let's see. So the next question that has come through is, what are some of the best strategies to nudge students who say, I hate math or I don't see the value even at an early age? Ashley, I see you nodding, so I'm going to start with you and see if it sounds like maybe you've heard that from some of your students.
So as an educator, I make it my goal to hopefully not hear that from my students because I was the student who thought I hated math. So it is so important for me for math to become accessible for all of my students and for them to be able to see themselves in the activities that we're doing. I think data is a natural way to students to feel successful, building on their curiosity. There is no one more curious than elementary school students, just that is what they love to do. And it feels so social and accessible for them when they're asking a question and getting to go out and explore and find their data survey and ask their questions of other people. So I think that this is such an accessible way for students to jump in because, we talk about activities with low floor, high ceiling. Data is where it's at. You can have them, everyone has something that they can share. They can contribute to conversations. Everyone can make a noticing. And then you as the teacher are there to help support with where you build the conversation and how you build those building blocks for students. But I was definitely nodding because yes, it's a shame when we hear that, but also I was just nodding because I'm very passionate about hopefully not hearing that as well.
I like that. I like that approach. And Deidre, I know that this is a conversation that comes up at the state level. How do we kind of change this mindset? How do we make math more approachable for students? Is that a conversation that well, I'm sure you all bat that around. Are there comments that you can add to that?
Yeah, I don't think I would add anything beyond what Ashley has said. I think that it comes through the way that both us as providers of professional learning and also through the way that our educators are engaging in conversation with and talking about mathematics, right? And so like we need to be intentional about speaking about math in positive ways and making it accessible and meeting folks where they are. And so I think that we see that as our role as providers of professional learning. And I think tons of educators like Ashley take that approach as well in their classrooms.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Michelle, you're back. I'm so glad that you were able to rejoin us. That's great. I'd love to hear your perspective as well, from as an administrator, when you have students who say, I hate math, or maybe not quite that strong language. How do you, what kinds of strategies do you use with the students, or do your educators use?
I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat because I might have missed what you said before.
That's okay. That's all right.
But I do think the big thing is making it engaging, right? If we can engage students and they're interested in what's going on, you know, from Ashley's examples of the glyphs that they were making of the Beatles, you know, to really getting students involved. And I think if you can personalize it in any way, so when they have the opportunity to share about themselves in some way, it's part of that classroom community. When they feel part of that community, it's a little harder to dislike being a part of that because you have some ownership. And so I think that is one of the things that I really have, you know, encouraged teachers to do. Take advantage of those connections you're already making to get students engaged in what you're trying to do. And I think that's where they found some success as well.
Perfect. Excellent. Yep. You're all on the same page. You're using different flavors of the same language, which I love. Michelle, now that you've rejoined, I'd love to revisit the question that I think we got part of your answer on. Can you give us some more specific examples of whole school data collection that resonated with your students?
I'm so sorry. The cleaner just opened my door to come in my office.
We understand. You're in a school. Like, it happens. Yeah.
So whole school data. So we did all the kind of personal, like, preferences sorts of things. So we, anything from birthday month, that was where we began the process. Everybody put their birthday month up, and then how you can use that data to do all kinds of different things, different representations from the data. How can you reorganize that data? You know, what does it tell us? You know, what questions might you ask about that? We did colors. We did who's going to win the Super Bowl, favorite colors, favorite ice creams. We did how you come to school, how you go home from school, because for a lot of our kids, that's different. Some might ride a car in the morning, but a bus home. I'm trying to think what else we did. Some vacation preferences. If you had to choose one of these, which one would be the one you would choose from? So anything that was kind of that accessible to all kind of question. And it didn't have to be a personal experience. What did you do? Unless we knew everyone could do whatever it was, but it could be a, what would you want to do? Or what would you like? Or, that sort of thing. So, those were some of the ones we did. And then there were big graphs in the hallway. And then after the different classes did different activities with them, the grade level would also put a few examples around the big graph of what those were, how we, interpreted this data, what kind of analysis we did, what kind of questions we proposed to go with this, how we reorganized this data to look a little different with a, sample graph or something, or another display of the data. So there was a lot done with that. In a very, I would say, short period of time, honestly, from that went up, I felt like within a month it bloomed all over the place because everybody was mixing it into different places.
Nice. I do love how you mentioned the accessible piece of it, and that it doesn't have to be where did you go on vacation, but where would you go? I think that's a great way to kind of flip that. So that's great. Wonderful. All right, Deidre, the next question is for you. Tell us what work can be done at the state level to expand data science concepts being taught at an earlier age?
That's a great question. So I think that what you have heard from me so far is, for me, the importance of ensuring that students get the foundational ideas of data, which I would argue begin with a mathematics perspective, right? So I talked earlier about the just basic idea that data can vary, right? And then kind of what numbers have students had access to date that they can use in comparison, right? And so I think there's some foundational ideas about numeracy that students need to have, and that informs the type of data that they can work with and the questions that they can actually answer based on the data that they collected or the data that they are being presented with. But then I think that there is this phase of the work that is about thinking intentionally about interdisciplinary learning. Like, where are the best spaces in the science curricula for like either the data literacy standards in New Jersey or whatever state you're in, the data standards to be integrated, and what does that look like? And I think that you can do that not just with kind of the more popular or more common, I should say, disciplines, the science and social studies, and even literacy, but we can even begin thinking about that like in specials, and in the upper grades. We certainly think about that in elective courses. And so I just think that we have to be strategic in figuring out where the best places are, whether that's time of year, whether that's the context, to do that. And I think it will ultimately be, for states like mine that are local control, a local curricular decision. So we just want to help folks understand data, understand the ideas of data, and then give them the power to find out where that fits best, in their curriculum and what works best for their educators.
Excellent. So equipping them with the tools and then letting them fly. Right?
That's it.
Excellent. Great. All right, Ashley, I am going to come back around to you. You spoke about how interdisciplinary this work can be. So when you're integrating data into your curriculum, do you tend to gravitate towards certain units or certain types of lessons? On the spot.
Question, because it's probably both. I'm going to be thinking through my answer as I respond, but it's probably both. Sometimes you're starting a unit and you're like, this would be a great place to put it. And then sometimes you're in that lesson and you're like, oh, wow, this is an opportunity to give the students a little bit more autonomy here to kind of dive in. I'm also pretty lucky. My partner is an upper school math teacher. And so he and I can bounce off ideas, and he really helps me see where those upper school skills really do start in the second grade level. And so we can talk a lot about how they build. But, I think unit is probably the one I would lean towards the most when I'm looking at the unit, like how could we allow this to come into it? And I think one of the things that the other speakers have also been talking about is so much of what we do in elementary school already has curriculums, right? Like we already have our core curriculums that we're doing. So those are provided for us. It really is about being the teacher, looking at it and thinking, where could I add this in as not so much an added ask, but how could I really make this activity more engaging for my students? Or where could I bring in some more learning for them? And that's really where I try to lean to, because you are going to get resistance if it's like an add-on, as opposed to how does this add to the lesson that we're already given.
Excellent. I love that. That is great. Thank you. All right, so we are actually down to our last question of the session, and I would love to have each of you touch on this briefly. So Michelle, if we could start with you, what has been your biggest lesson learned as you've implemented data science topics for K-5?
I think the biggest lesson from this past year of our work is be flexible. Because I think what the vision, even of my teachers, of what this meant when we began working, was very like, how can I improve my math instruction? How am I going to have students better be able to do this in science on a lab report or something like that, or after an experiment? And what it has become is much more about, how do I get my students to think critically? How do I get my students to take ownership of the information and tell me about it, and take some lead in the learning, and kind of that backing off of having like a set, like, well, you have your goal in the end of what they're going to do with it, but like not being so stuck on one thing and being open to where the learning takes them. And because of that, I think the teachers also then are more willing to like try another thing, right? Like, oh my gosh, great things happen, right? And I think that's the joy sometimes in being an educator is when you see that unexpected happen, or the deeper connection to the learning that they've made, that the learning is much deeper than you ever anticipated, and you're like, this is worth it. Let's keep going. Let's try something else. So I think that's pretty amazing.
That's wonderful. What a great experience for your teachers to see, and for you to see as well. That's great. Excellent. All right. Deidre, let's bump right back to you and ask the same question. So what has been your biggest lesson learned as you all are getting ready to implement data science in the standards?
Yeah, for us, I think it would be to always center teacher voice. It was so critical for us as we were developing standards. It will continue to be critical for us as we develop resources and as we learn together what data literacy looks like precisely at various grades. We will need to lean on our elementary educators to do that and to get that right. And so for us, it will be the centering of teacher voices.
That's wonderful. I love that they've been so involved in your process, because I think that's
Yes.
obviously the only way this can work. So,
Yes.
so that's phenomenal. Great. All right, Ashley, tell us about your biggest lesson learned in this process.
I think a huge lesson that I've learned is not to overcomplicate,
Mm.
not to make it too complicated, or it's going to become something that isn't enjoyable for the students, because it's not enjoyable for me. So where can we really bring this in for students? And then also just the importance of what I've learned for my students and how they're able to communicate, and how this pushes them to communicate in a way that's not, this is forcing them to really think about something and then communicate that to others. And so I've just seen a huge payoff in how they can write and talk about math from using data. So, and I'm going to share one more, just the importance of cycling throughout the year. It can't just be like a one-off thing. So monthly explorations of data and allowing them to do this more often really does build those skills and their vocabulary and tools that they have. So sorry, I shared more than one.
No, not at all. Don't apologize. This is great. This is exactly what I hope that our audience is looking for, is just these tangible takeaways, what, those lessons learned, and then these resources that all of you have shared. I think that'll be invaluable, I hope. So thank you all so much for sharing your experiences with us and for really diving in deep with us. One last question actually that I caught in the chat from Sean, who asked, is there a framework that organizes these approaches to help guide districts and schools who are new at this? Well, Sean, we have great news for you. Our working group, well, let me start out by saying we're dropping a link into the chat right now for our new K-5 data literacy implementation guide. So this is one, this document provides guidance for implementing data literacy in your curriculum, and it's modeled after the data cycle that was created by our partners, Data Education in Schools in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the guide offers best practices for integrating data literacy. It does provide free resources you can utilize to address the different phases of the cycle. And it does actually work through some sample learning outcomes, which I believe Zarek will be sharing a little bit more about that work that we are getting into as a team at Data Science for Everyone. But this guide, we hope, will be just that, a guide as you're looking to implement this work in your classrooms. We will also be sharing a K-5 grade band document, which will also be linked in the chat. And that does contain free resources from a wide array of Data Science for Everyone partners, like Data Education in Schools, like Data Kids from Tableau, Tuva Junior, UCubed, and several others. So we hope that you'll take advantage of these guides and find resources that work for you. And like our panelists said, be flexible, center that teacher voice, and don't overcomplicate. So with that, I will turn it back over to Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing about the awesome work that you all are doing in many places across the country. And thank you all to those who are able to join us tonight and this afternoon to attend our conversation today. One of my big takeaways and reflections from this webinar, and what I would offer as a takeaway to you all, I think you can see that this content is both approachable and also concurrently really engaging for students. And it allows us to explore cross-subject connections in a way that we haven't been able to before. I think that K-5 teachers and educators are especially good at. And that is just such a great sweet spot. And I'm really excited to grow this work further and explore what other potential student experiences we can create together. Data shouldn't be showing up for the first time for students in 12th grade, whether it's a focused high school data science course or even an AP statistics class. There is a critical level 1 for everyone. And I saw a lot of folks in the chat who are already trying this out or have been for a bit now. And we're all here to help make it happen. So on that note, I'm going to share out a few other DS3 resources and community channels so you all can learn more about the events like this one. If you do have time or if it's of use and interest to you, please check out our resource center and also all of our social media channels. In particular, our resource center online has a lot of great example lesson plans, full year courses, data sets, research documents, and even self-paced online learning resources to train yourself about data science or data literacy techniques, and then ways to translate that into the classroom for your students. We do a lot of work to try to scour the internet and work with a lot of curriculum partners across the space to aggregate everything in one place. And if you know of a resource that is not listed yet, please let us know, because we want to make sure that we can get that added to the resource hub and make it accessible for everyone who is working in this arena. So grateful for all the folks who've already contributed their amazing projects there. And then before we log off, I wanted to quickly preview a campaign that we are super excited about that we are going to be launching tomorrow, that you all get a sneak peek on the process. The new effort is called Chart the Course. Data Science for Everyone is working to develop the first ever national K-12 data science and data literacy education learning progressions. And we need your help to ensure it's comprehensive and inclusive as possible. For stage 1, we are asking the whole community to vote on sample learning outcomes to help us identify priority learning targets for students by the time they reach the end of high school. We've been running a pretty extensive process over the past 6 months where we've brought together a number of stakeholders across the education sector, ranging from teachers in math, science, social studies, computer science, policymakers, higher education folks, industry partners, and even students directly to help us build what are the target learning outcomes for data science and data literacy that we should be integrating across school subjects in K-12. We are now looking for everyone's input, and we really want this to be a participatory process. We likely missed a few ideas. We came up with a draft list of learning outcomes through all that work that the focus groups did over the past 6 months, but now we need your help to make sure we can make it even better. This is also the first stage of the project. In the rest of this year and going into the early 2025, we're then going to go to work on a stage 2 that will make things much more granular and work on that grade by grade learning progression. Right, and it's not a coincidence that we are launching this project on the eve of our K-5 data literacy webinar, because we're both trying to think about what does that end of high school target look like, and what are the foundations that we can start building early on in the student's elementary school experience, and then let's connect the dots in between. So we need your help to get involved in this project. We are trying to hit 1,000 participants, or at least 1,000 votes, to make sure that we get a really robust read and capture of what the community is caring about. So we're officially launching it tomorrow, but you are able to go in now and give a sneak preview. And if you want to go ahead and fill out the learning outcomes survey, it's presented as a digital ballot. You can help anchor some of the first responses before it goes to the general public. So you can help bias some of the results if you wish to. But yeah, we're super excited to be launching this project. It's been a huge milestone for our team, and I think it will really help bring a lot of these different threads together across the community. I likely cover that in more depth than you all needed. So we will give you some time back, 2 minutes here before we sign off. Just another huge thank you to our speakers, to Lee Ellen for moderating, and for all the work that everyone's doing to bring these opportunities to students. And finally, if you requested a certificate of completion for today's webinar, one will be emailed to you tonight. But thank you again so much for joining us. Hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you next month with our next webinar.